Hello, everybody. We've just got folks joining here right on the hour. Excited to have a real informative webinar about some very pertinent topics, looking at fraud alert, something that affects all of us. So I'll give a few moments here as people are signing in. And then from there, I'll introduce our speaker. We are excited to have a speaker with some great expertise on this subject, teach us all a bit about what we can do, how to protect ourselves in this changing world. All right, well, I'll get us started. Want to make good use of folks' time. And like always, if you're not able to join us live, we send these out as a follow-up to folks. So if there's any information there you missed, it'll come to you as well as a follow-up. As a reminder, we're not able to use the Ask Question feature here in Zoom. So if you do have questions, please shoot them to connect@sequoiawa.com. My team is managing that email, checking it. They'll send me any notes so we can have some timely conversation with questions as they may come up. But yeah, once again, welcome. I'm Katie Lindfelt, financial planner here at Sequoia Wealth Advisors, and I'm so excited to be able to bring some pertinent information in to everyone. So before we dive in, I want to take a moment, share a little bit about who I am and what I do here at Sequoia. My journey into financial planning actually started as a student. I was deeply reminded of that this week as I got to go speak in a high school economics class about what is financial planning. They're that phase in their econ class, and that is actually where my interest in all of this started, that graduation requirement econ class. Seeing those bigger pictures, I took that information, studied in college as well, and it was there that I realized, well, the big picture was interesting. Where I really felt it was on the impacts on each individual. And that's where I am within financial planning. It's the idea that every little, small, everyday decision can have a profound impact on life and the lives we build over time. That connection between the choices we make today and the future we create felt really meaningful to me. And honestly, it really still does. What drives me here is pretty simple. I want people to feel clear and confident about their money, not scared about it. Because when you understand what your money's doing and why, everything changes. That's what we're doing here. That's what Christina and I get to do every day here at Sequoia, and it never gets old. We're doing this for real people, about their real lives, and that's just exciting. And so that's really why we brought this conversation today. We have a fantastic guest joining us with some great background because, well, we can do everything looking to help where you want to go. Fraud and those risks are hazards along the way. And if we can help protect, make smart decisions there, that can serve you even better for the long run. So our speaker today is Bertrand. He's from TransAmerica. He's got great credentials as well. He's also a CFP like I am, as well as a CLU. He's a vice president, managing director of advanced markets there, and he's been in this industry for a good long time and brings some deep expertise here within estate planning, financial planning, taxation, retirement plans, charitable giving. And here we're looking at some of the more complex pieces as it all fits together at these real strategies for individual clients. So Ryan will give us some great information. If you have questions, if you need more, please shoot an email to connect@sequoiawa.com. I'm sure there'll be a few minutes where I can ask him some questions as well, and such.
Great to hear that high schools now are using economy classes for economics classes for financial planning. Because when I went to
Oh,
high
I
school,
know.
I
It
don't think
was
they
so fun.
uttered the words financial planning at all. So that is fantastic to hear because that's very near and dear to my heart and what I do. We do everything financial planning. I head up the advanced markets department at TransAmerica, which means that we discuss a myriad of different things, this among one of them. But given our society, our proclivity towards using technology for most everything, and the vulnerabilities that come with that, this has become a very popular topic, in addition to how common it has become. So today we're going to talk about fraud and how to protect yourself predominantly. Our agenda, I'm going to overview the issues, some of the societal problems that have made this so very common, how to protect yourself, and then action steps. So, to begin with, this is a significant issue. When we first launched this presentation, it was more or less an elder fraud presentation. But as we gave it, we found that everybody was very prone to scams, being ripped off, not just individuals of an advanced age. And it is really difficult to pin down as a country, albeit as a world, how much we're losing to fraud year in and year out. It's a tricky number to put your finger on. Estimates say it's somewhere between 3.5 billion per year, and I've seen other estimates that say 3.7 trillion. So extraordinarily difficult gulf to try and fill in. 36.5 billion is one thrown out quite a bit. Regardless of what the number is, it's going to be underreported, difficult to actually pin down because of the nature of fraud and how it's reported. A lot of times it goes unreported. People are more or less not even certain it happens to them in a lot of scenarios, unfortunately, very embarrassed when it does occur. But a lot of this is the convergence of technology and longevity. And our society is one that continues to be impacted by those two things. And this is something we live out in real life on a daily basis. Technology, I know, has become so commonplace. Whereas when I was a kid, I remember we had a Tandy computer. And if anyone remembers that Tandy computer, you bought them at Radio Shack, which Radio Shack doesn't even exist. But these Tandy computers were these gigantic machines that more or less required a level of expertise, or else they were more or less 100-pound paperweights if you didn't know how to run it, because they were run on a system called MS-DOS. And MS-DOS, if you didn't know the command prompts and how to put them in properly, it was completely useless. So there was a level of expertise necessary for technology. Today, it's completely different. You don't need any expertise whatsoever. And in fact, a cat can run an iPad. It is so intuitive. It's also one of those areas where we can get ourselves in trouble very quickly. Now, if you think about technology and how much it's become ingrained in our daily lives, it has happened at a astonishing pace. And in fact, technology cycles, we've seen things like cassette players, 8-track players, CDs, and MP3s all come into fruition in a very short period of time, now being taken over by the iPhone, which is 20 years old. And the iPhone and the smartphone have completely dominated many different devices and are ingrained in our daily lives to such an extent that the average American is checking their smartphone 144 times throughout the course of a day. They're spending 4 hours and 20 minutes on their iPhone and then in front of screens, which right now this counts as screen time for everybody that's on the call. The average American is spending over 7 hours every single day in front of some type of screen. The issue is technology is a portal to exploitation if it's used improperly. Also, it is very difficult to understand many of the complexities that are buried in our technology inside that smartphone, the use of social media, AI coming on the scene very rapidly. These little intricacies in the technology, clicking the wrong link, for example, could potentially cause financial catastrophe. Everything is interrelated. Someone gets your password, they have your biometrics, your phone may be linked to a credit card or a bank account, and that technology that's made our life so convenient all of a sudden is a portal to potential disaster. So being very careful with technology and understanding all of these issues as it pertains to technology is important when we talk about fraud. Now, also, we are as a society growing older. One notable advent in the last 100 years, you could argue has been born through technology, is longer and longer and longer lifespans. You go back to the beginning of mankind and you look at life expectancy for the average human being to walk planet Earth was a mere 29 years old. You go back 100 years, average life expectancy was 47. If I say 29 and 47 today as a potential life expectancy, that would be extraordinarily young. people are living on horizons that we've never seen before. In fact, Time Magazine, they did an issue in February of 2015. It had the picture of a really cute baby on it. And the proclamation in that issue of Time Magazine was that baby was born on planet Earth today already, and they were going to live to age 142. Not to be outdone, the Wall Street Journal the very next week said it's not 142, it's 150. There's a Harvard professor who's very prominent in the world of longevity, a guy by the name of David Sinclair. He's been on record as saying that there's someone alive that's going to live to the age of 200. So we do have this convergence of technology, longer longevity, potentially cognitive decline, and that does increase the prevalence of fraud. One of the biggest precursors of fraud is cognitive decline, and we see high rates of it for people as they're growing older. So this could be your aging parents, it could be yourself, but I would say age isn't necessarily the only forecaster of whether or not you're prone to getting scammed. This is now something that can happen to everybody. One of my favorite stories of someone who both lived a long time, but unfortunately was a victim of fraud, is a guy by the name of Richard Overton. Richard Overton was out of Austin, Texas. He passed away at the ripe old age of 112. Interesting thing about Richard Overton, he was the oldest veteran when he passed away alive on planet Earth. But every year in Austin, Texas, on his birthday, when he crossed 100 years old, they would do a story on him on his birthday. They would say his name. And they did this every single year on his birthday. And what ended up happening is someone caught on to it. They got his name. They knew his birthday. You can guess what happened. They literally took all of his assets. They were able to hack his accounts. Thankfully, there was such an uproar that Mr. Overton was indemnified. Also lost in the longevity conversation is how expensive it is to live to these advanced ages. He was spending $15,000 per month, $180,000 per year just to maintain his lifestyle, dignity, and independence at that age. So to have someone go in and take all of your assets maliciously was catastrophic for him. Now, also spending that much money anyway, even when he was indemnified, Austin, Texas had to rally around him and they set up a GoFundMe initiative. And by the time he passed away, they had saved over $450,000, $453,000 to be exact, on his behalf. So the story did have somewhat of a happy ending financially for Richard because they did have that GoFundMe initiative for him. But many people don't even know this is happening. You can protect yourself, and sometimes this happens passively. This is very unsettling. You can go to almost any major news publication in the last few months and read about any number of different data breaches. And I'm sure many of you may have been involved in these. And even the credit bureaus themselves are getting hacked. And this could be from somewhere halfway across the world, maybe even someone working for a government as a state-sponsored hacker. This is crazy to think about. But we know Equifax, in 2017, 147 million people had their data compromised. The settlement for that finally wrapping up in 2024 to this year. TransUnion more recently in 2025 was hacked. So you can do everything right and even passively have your information compromised because of some other company. So this is a very scary time that we live in from that standpoint. Now, I do think it does make a big difference, though, understanding that there can be these macro level events of data breaches and hacks, but also understanding the difficulty that this can place someone in. And I did mention that there's different variables that will predict someone's probability of falling prey to a scam. And number one with a bullet is age. And there are others as well, but I view this predominantly as a family issue. But if you look at this biologically and you think about your age and why this is such a problem as we get older, your brain matures at age 25. So that's your cognitive peak. That's when you're fully formed as an adult. I know some people maybe never reach that, but the rental car companies had it right. Age 25 is when your prefrontal cortex, according to most scientists, is fully developed. And then 35 to 55, you continue to progress cognitively before decline starts at age 70. Now, you become more prone to scams when you start to experience that natural age-related cognitive decline, 59% specifically more prone to scam. Now, you do see some warning signs here, and this is, again, being such a family issue. If you see changes in someone's spending patterns, deviation in the way that they're living, a new person in their life, unlikely person maybe helping with finances, becoming withdrawn, signs of neglect. These are all things that maybe point to senior abuse or exploitation. But when I give these presentations out to the public and you talk face to face with people who have had major losses from fraud, one of the things that's very striking is the emotional turmoil that it can cause. People do become very withdrawn. They become very embarrassed. There was one lady who had not even really that much money taken from her account. I think she said she had about $500 drained by a fraudster, but she felt so violated that she didn't leave her house for 2 weeks because of the embarrassment that it caused. How can this happen to me? But really, it can happen to anybody. So, embarrassment certainly is a real thing, but other issues are things we have to be aware of. So if you do have a family member that is aging and may have cognitive decline or dementia, this becomes even that much more of a problem. And sadly, in those scenarios where we do see exploitation, it's usually a person in a position of trust or a family member who's bringing the problem to bear. So it can be even that much more difficult to weed out that conflict or confront and resolve it. But here, knowledge is power. If you can understand a few things to protect yourself, you are that much more sound financially. And those scams that are a world away become that much more difficult to execute. Now, even knowing if you're in an at risk group is an important aspect here. And there are things, as I've mentioned, that could cause you to be more prone than others. And some of them are somewhat surprising. I don't think it's any surprise that someone who's diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia may become more prone to fraud. But really, some of the other ones, being highly educated is a precursor to falling prone to scams. And these are sometimes some of the larger scams because you have this inflated sense of confidence in your own financial ability or ability to avoid fraud. People that are thrifty are 5 times more likely to fall for some type of fraud because they're trying to save money. Also, people that are overly friendly, people who are recently retired, hospitalized, institutionalized, that becomes a very big red flag to being ripped off because of that position where you're prone to someone ripping you off because you're giving them a lot of trust. Someone who's lost a spouse, someone who's moved to an over 50 community, those are people, especially from an overconfidence standpoint in education, that it's important to realize you're not immune to this, but understanding the scams and the patterns and things to avoid can go a long way to avoiding a significant loss. And we do know what the common scams are year in and year out. These are highly published. There's many different lists you can go to. This one happens to be on my favorite. It's the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's list, and they identify 10 common scams every single year. And these don't change over time. You see the same ones on the list year in and year out. So if you know what these scams are and you know how to avoid them, it does put you in a significantly better position. We're not going to cover every single one of these today, but knowing some of the fact patterns that you've seen, and these are time tested, it does help you avoid them. And I think this one hits near and dear to my heart because I remember my grandpa was always a victim of the charity scam. He wasn't allowed to pick up the telephone by the time he passed away because he was on some list where someone knew if they called him and say that he won the lottery or he just had to provide some money for a big prize, that he would pay up every single time. He couldn't help himself. And these are the imposter scams. And the idea is someone you don't know is pretending to be someone that they're not. That can be usually a position of authority. That is one of the telltale signs of this. So it's either I'm the FBI, you're being investigated. I'm the IRS, you owe us money. Send me an Amazon gift card or go to the Google store and get me credit. So first off, these people aren't going to call you out of the blue. And if they do call you out of the blue, they're not going to ask payment or remuneration in the form of an Amazon gift card or Google store credit. So just knowing sometimes what they're after can help you reverse engineer people who are spoofing somebody else or impersonating them and avoid you getting into any trouble whatsoever. Also, you're not going to win a contest you didn't enter. That Nigerian prince, it sounds ridiculous, and that's probably the worst form of impersonation and imposter scam, but we still do see people fall for this. And a lot of it is connected with people who are experiencing cognitive decline because the more ridiculous the proposition is, that's why the Nigerian prince is so popular, because someone who's experiencing cognitive decline, it seems very realistic that they may get money out of the blue. But for someone who's not experiencing cognitive decline, it just seems ridiculous. But just understanding that people in different frames of mind may fall for different impersonation scams. But the charity, the debt collection scam, or avoiding arrest scam are timeless. They've just changed in the manner in which they're being pursued. Spoof calls are another good example of this. So, spoof calls, if you don't recognize the number, my pearl of wisdom here is maybe don't pick the phone up. If it really is important, what I find is people will leave you a voicemail. So, a lot of times the cell companies have gotten a lot better at weeding these out, and you'll see potential spam on your phone before the call even pops up, might go to silent. Silence those calls if you have the setting or you know how to get to it. That does weed a lot of them out. But again, if you don't recognize the number and it really is important, it's not always necessary to pick up the phone. A lot of times I'll just let it go to voicemail. I've not missed a call that I really needed to take. And I've avoided a lot of these spoof calls becoming a problem because I know on the other end of the line, there's someone trying to impersonate someone or trying to get some piece of information out of me that I otherwise wouldn't provide. The other one is becoming a lot more scary with technology. And this is a variation of the imposter scam. It's the grandparent scam. And I remember when this first came out, roughly a decade ago, there was a slew of telephone calls where you would pick up the phone and you'd be greeted by silence on the other end of the phone. The person on the other end of the phone was hoping you would say a few key words like hello. They'd ask you a question like, are you blank your name? And they were hoping you'd say the word yes. What they were doing is they were trying to sample your voice. This was the very beginning of deepfakes because they would call into a bank. Some bank automation systems would look for keywords and you could use it to compromise someone's account. I don't know how successful those original ones were, but I remember getting a dozen of those calls and more or less hanging up on them because I knew what they were trying to do. Now this is morphed though, because your name, your image, your likeness, your voice, it's available most anywhere. You can go online. If you've ever been recorded, ever done a presentation, or done any media, you can probably find somebody's voice. Or you can record them in a grocery store if you know who they are. There are ways to get people's voices. But now with voice sampling and AI, you can synthesize someone's voice fairly easily. And this happened to a coworker of mine about a year ago. His dad got a call in the middle of the night from him. Something didn't quite sound right, but he said he was in trouble. He needed money. And 2 a.m., thinking, taking a step back, he hung up, called his son back, completely fake. But someone had gotten my coworker's voice, replicated it. Now, thankfully, the replication still is a little off. So there might sound like something that's a little askew if you do get one of these calls or if someone has sampled and synthesized your voice because the AI cadence is still very somewhat predictable. And if you know what to listen for, you can suss it out. But it's so easy to do this. I've actually done it with my own voice. I've gone on, found a clip on me on YouTube, uploaded it into a voice synthesizer software. It took maybe 5 minutes to do. And I can type in my voice anything I want to have it say. So this is kind of scary when this comes up. Also, social engineering, using social media. They'll wait until you go on vacation, and then your loved one knows that you're out of the country or away from home and that you're in trouble and you need help quickly. It can be very difficult to discern the real thing from something that's fake. So here, coming up with a code word for your loved ones can be a good best practice. It could be just something silly. This is just something between you and your loved one that you know only they would know. It can be a tip off as to whether or not it's the genuine thing. You could say, so tell me the code word, and then they'll say it. So real easy way to engineer something to get around this if this ever does become a problem. Only something that they would know, or even just ask them something that they would know. Mail fraud scams are not nearly as sophisticated, but probably more effective. I would bet there's been a lot more loss to porch pirates than to AI scammers pretending to call someone in the middle of the night. Also, just stealing stuff out of the mail is still a major problem. Thankfully, there's a couple of things you can employ to get around this. I think informed delivery is a good best practice. We'll talk about that later on, but more what this allows you to do is to get a picture of what's in your mail. And I remember during the pandemic, there was a lot of issues with people signing up for unemployment. This actually happened to my mom. My mom hadn't worked until the 80s or since the 80s. And during the pandemic, she got what she thought was her debit card. She's a US bank customer, so her debit card was white. And she just looked at it, and actually, this card looked white as well. But it turned out it was an unemployment card. Someone took her information, enrolled her for unemployment benefits because of them being more lucrative during the pandemic, and they were hoping to get to the mailbox before her to steal that card. Thankfully, she got there, determined that there was fraud, contacted unemployment, got it taken care of. But I'm sure there are many circumstances where someone didn't get to the mailbox in time and had that card stolen. But generally, what they're looking for is checks. And here, just the way that you write checks, if you still do write checks, is important. So check washing, and I was a victim of this back in the early 2000s. I remember paying my electricity bill, and they washed the name on the check. It was XL Energy, and they came up with something that was very close to it, so it didn't look too suspicious. But the check was washed, and because of the ink in my pen, they were very able to easily wash the check. So if you know what kind of ink you're using in your pens, something as simple as buying a pen with gel-based ink expressly for the purpose of writing checks makes it extremely difficult for them to physically wash a check. So best practice here, use a pen that's using gel-based ink if you're writing physical checks because of how difficult it is. It's nearly impossible to wash that type of ink, where typical ink, it can be washed very easily. The most pervasive type of fraud, as far as sheer dollars lost, is wire fraud. And this is misdirection fraud. This is where someone's trying to get you to send money to an account generally associated with a mortgage. This happened to my brother back in the day. This was, again, in the early 2000s. He was buying his first house. What ended up happening is the mortgage agent got an email from someone at the bank that had erroneous account information. So someone had gained access to that employee's computer, sent an email from their account. Thankfully, they were able to go in and find it, and he was absolved of any loss. But something as simple as misdirection can cause money to be wired to the wrong place. So providing information around wires, anytime you're doing a wire transfer, the reason that this is such a problem is once that money leaves your account, it's gone. It's going to be misdirected in multiple different ways. Generally, it's almost impossible to get it back, even though there's a couple of stories where people have been successful acting quickly enough to do it. But anytime you're instigating a wire transfer, especially around mortgage, be really careful with how you're approaching that information. If someone tries to change the information, something just doesn't seem right, I would always say deal with people verbally in these scenarios, because it's so easy to misdirect someone via email or electronic communication. It does help quite a bit if you're dealing with people on a direct basis. But if you're a victim of this type of fraud, it is very difficult to get your money back. That's why you have to pay so close attention to it. Romance scams, these are also really old types of scams, and these are the long cons. These are cons where you're gaining someone's confidence over time. And there was one scenario here where it was someone who had a friendship with someone who was making these outlandish claims of having ridiculous amounts of wealth, with the idea being that over time they gained their trust, and then they asked for money. I just need this $50,000 to get my billions of dollars. And they provide that small amount of money with the promise of something larger, and all of a sudden they're ripped off. Also, catfishing is an example here, where someone, especially older aged, may be lonely, seeking out companionship on any number of dating apps, coming to find, even though that they're trusting that the people that were on that site aren't real, but they're trying to rip them off, paying for airfare or other things. There's numerous examples of this happening and people losing tons and tons of money. And here, I think helping your family, recognizing if they're in that scenario, to intervene in that situation, especially if you notice that they're losing money, or having a financial professional in these regards. Someone watching your back is priceless as far as being able to identify the patterns where people lose large amounts of wealth because of scams. Money mule scams, they're becoming more prevalent, but this is an integral part for a lot of money laundering. So they're trying to make ill-begotten gains legitimate. One variation of this that I've seen happen to a friend of mine who was laid off during the pandemic, and Thankfully, he thought he was going to get a job, went through a morass of different interviews, comes to find out he gets to the final step and they want his social security number. And turns out the entire thing was fraud. He was scammed. Shame that they're wasting that much someone's time actually doing interviews, but they'll go to extreme lengths to make something seem legitimate, and it does occur. But the idea being they're trying to put money into someone's hands to have them send it back. Reimbursement is a common example of this, to clean the money. But that can implicate you as a crime, even if you know it or not in many scenarios, because of how these scams work. And I mentioned technology as being a gateway to being ripped off now. And this is because, again, technology is very intuitive, very easy to use, but oh so complicated. So there are a couple of things to be aware of. And it's tough to keep on top of all of these because they change so rapidly. So the first one is the smartphone. So smartphone privacy is a big issue. I know it's annoying anytime we jump on a website and we have to click the accept the cookies, but this is for a good reason. It's trying to keep our information private. If you understand what's going on there, it's more or less 9 times out of 10 for targeted advertising and all those nice little advertisements you get in social media. But there are other settings as well on our smartphone that are equally important. So knowing what type of permission to provide to the right types of app is the key here. So some apps, and I know there have been apps launched that have been intended to get your information. That's the only reason that they existed. There was one that was launched out of Russia years ago, and it was an aging app. So you'd put your picture in and it would show what you'd look like 50 years from now. Problem is, the only reason that they wanted that app was to get your information. So the information that you know that you're providing to these apps does become important if you're trying to protect yourself. So a couple of key pieces on these apps. One, are you providing information to the app as far as biometrics, as far as cameras, as far as browser history? The second would be more important, location. And this is important because of privacy issues and understanding that if everyone knows where you are, especially if it's an app that's not needing your location, maybe it isn't the best idea to provide that app your location. I understand it if it's Waze, Google Maps, Apple Maps, GPS technology, so you can find where you're going. That makes sense. But does a social media app really need to know your location? Providing your location to some of those apps can be problematic because if someone can track you, they can go to your house and they can rob you. And this happens a lot from social media and social engineering. There have been a spate of burglaries because people will overshare on social media, say where they are, and then someone will know they're not home and then come and burglar their house. Best practice here, maybe don't provide location services if the app doesn't actually need it. It's very easy to say, I only want the app to have my location while I'm actually using the app, or just disable it in general if the app doesn't need it. So certainly using some discretion there will help, but also maybe not oversharing location can be a good best practice. I know it's tempting while you're on the vacation to post on social media so everyone can see all the great things you're doing, but maybe it's better to wait till you're home. And then that's not such an issue. So oversharing on social media is a big one. But the bigger question here, and this is the big brother question, especially with things like Facebook, where you're giving them permission to use your microphone, to listen to your conversations, and really drill down to try and target you for advertisements. And thankfully, it seems at this point that's the most insidious way that they're using that information. But if you've ever had that experience where you're talking about something and then all of a sudden it shows up in your social media feed, it's really kind of creepy. So I have a son who's a month old, but while my wife was pregnant, we were having a conversation and she wanted a pregnancy pillow. Of course, we have that conversation, and the very next day I jump on Facebook and what do I see? Advertisements for pregnancy pillows. Is that coincidence, or is Facebook looking for certain keywords? And it's not just Facebook. There's other social media that have been accused of doing the exact same thing, but understanding that you're providing this permission and they could be using that information is something that can be unsettling, but something you should be aware of. Even something like services in automobiles have now been accused of sampling people's conversations to drill down and get better advertisements targeted to them. And then there's TikTok. TikTok now is under arrangement to become an American company. But the biggest issue around TikTok was that the company that owned it is a Chinese company, which makes the Chinese government be able to go and get all the information that they have. And they collect a lot of information. They have been shared as one of the most robust collectors of information and things that many people may not like them getting information on. So this would be things like your browser history, your facial ID, voice prints, text, location, photos, you name it. You probably gave them permission to access that if you use the TikTok app on your phone. And that may be completely benign. There may be no issue with that whatsoever. However, if you don't like that idea, maybe don't download the TikTok app. You can access TikToks or videos through other mechanisms that maybe make your information less prone to being out in the open. And then, of course, there's AI. And AI is so good at code and understanding the underlying intricacies of technology that used the wrong way, it can be a significant problem. The deep fakes I mentioned are getting more and more realistic, or even just taking someone's likeness and making them look like they did something else. There's a scam that's been around forever, and it's a junk email scam. And the scam goes something like, I got access to your email, and then I got access to your phone, and I've been seeing all the terrible things that you've been doing. Send me money to my cryptocurrency wallet, and I won't release these compromising photos. Now, what you'll notice in these messages is they're highly impersonal. It's just someone blanket sending this large message to any email address that they can get their hands on. And they'll never use your name because they don't know your name. So the less personal that it is, the less legitimate that it actually is. But taking that idea the next step, because they don't have access to your phone, they didn't get your camera, they don't have compromising pictures of you. But with AI, and especially the image generation capabilities of AI, you could literally take someone's face, someone's likeness, and make it seem like they did that. And that's where it starts to get really scary. And blackmail from that is pervasive. It's really difficult to try and protect yourself against that. The deep fakes are getting a little bit out of hand. Thankfully, it seems that some of the AI creators are becoming a little more attuned to this, becoming a little more regulated. But that's the problem with technology. The technology curve will always have capabilities ahead of regulation. And then it takes time for the regulators to catch up. So AI is going to be a problem, especially with the deep fakes, even hacking. So if you paid attention the last few weeks with Mythos from Anthropic, they said that they would not release this AI platform because it was too powerful, specifically too powerful at hacking. Now, the question is it really that powerful at hacking? Maybe it is. Could be marketing. They could be saying this to try and get more attention onto that specific AI platform and that company in particular. However, it does open up the questions as far as our safety and security in the face of something as potent technologically as that. But the deep fakes are something we have to be aware of, and they are getting better and better. Trying to protect your name, image, and likeness will probably far more likely become more important in years to come if this isn't curtailed, at least to some degree. And then cryptocurrency is another example of this because cryptocurrency was far ahead of regulators, very unregulated, especially when it first came out, and something that many people did not understand. So people would invest in it. They would open up digital wallets and platforms to invest to find that what they set up wasn't legitimate. And actually, this happened to a friend of mine. And I was talking to this gentleman, and he was saying that he got into cryptocurrency, and it didn't quite seem right when he was talking about it because he said he couldn't. He's making all this money. He had such a great appreciation in his cryptocurrency, but it was really difficult to get money out. He said he's had this 1,000% return, which is great, but he can't get the money. Turns out that the person who gave him the tip was a bartender who set up the cryptocurrency wallet, created a fake cryptocurrency wallet, stole his money, and the reason he couldn't get his money out was because there was no money there. It was a fake application that was put on his phone. But a perfect example of someone not understanding the technology that they're going into and how sometimes the technology, the innovations that are out there far exceed the regulator's ability to keep on top of it. So if they're not able to shoulder it, that means that we have to take responsibility for it. Of course, only investing in things that we understand, especially from a technological standpoint, is a good measure, or at least talking to someone who understands the nuances of whatever the investment may be, and just taking a step back. A lot of times there's a lot of urgency in these scams, but there's never really that level of urgency in actual life. You can take a step back, think about it. They're trying to trigger your amygdala and your emotional response, your acute stress response to get you to quickly fall into something. That investment's going to be going away. We need this money now, or something bad's going to happen. You're going to be arrested. You're going to be audited by the IRS, or grandpa, something bad is going to happen to me. You take a step back, give it a few hours, you identify the issues of why that might not be legitimate and keep yourself from having problems. So that brings us to our final area, and that's action steps, the ways to protect yourself. And some of you are probably very familiar with all this. Sometimes the easy, basic stuff is the most effective things that you can implement. Taking a look at your credit report on an ongoing basis. Also, understanding that there are ways to stop people from accessing your credit. A lot of these scams are trying to get personal information. They're trying to get your social security number. They're trying to get an account numbers. Usually they're trying to open up credit or access to money that's already there. So from the credit standpoint, the best thing that you can do from identity theft is identify, do I have a legitimate need to use my credit? If I don't have a legitimate need to open up credit or use it, it may not be a bad idea to utilize one of these functions that's available through all three of the major credit reporting agencies. So a credit alert creates a heightened level of protection anytime you have an extension of new credit. So you're not stopped from getting credit. There's just an alert saying that there's a level of extra steps that the organizations need to take. Now, if you know you're not using your credit, you're not going to get a mortgage, you're not going to apply for a new credit card, an auto loan, you may want to think about a credit freeze, because a credit freeze until it's lifted will stop anyone from being able to open credit on your record. So if someone tries to open a credit card in your name, they will not be able to do it because your credit is frozen. Very easy to lift if you do want to apply for a credit card or a mortgage or a loan. So if you know you're not going to be doing it, there's no harm in freezing your credit. I know some people will say, well, I don't want to do that because then I have to go back and unlift it and I might forget my password. And when you do sign up for it, they give you the riot act on how difficult it is if you lose your password. I do know people who have lost their password from these credit reporting agencies, and there are ways to get back into the system. So I wouldn't let that be something that would stop you from freezing your credit if it is something that you're interested in. Also, online protection. Here's a couple of other things I think are important. So strong passwords. And I know it's difficult to keep track of all of those passwords and all the different permutations they want you to do. A password manager can help. But I think one thing, especially for large financial accounts, anything very sensitive, two-factor authentication, even for your email. And here I've seen this happen a couple of times, even in my own circumstance, where I'll get a notification from my two-factor authentication because passwords can be hacked. Passwords are somewhat easy to get. You can hack someone's password, but that second layer of defense that two-factor authentication provides will ping you to actually get in your account. And I have seen requests come through on my two-factor authentication from countries across the world or halfway across the United States for people trying to access my accounts. So this does act as that last line of defense. I know it can be a little bit annoying, but that's less annoying than actually having things stolen from you. Auto pay can be another good one. And then not oversharing, as I mentioned, for the offline protection. There's a couple other things you can do. So informed delivery is a good one. Informed delivery through USPS, through the Postal Service, you sign up for this and it puts a picture of what's in your mail when it's delivered. Stop people from stealing from your mailbox. If you get that picture and something's missing, then you know, especially if you're expecting something like a credit card, which I've had that happen to me where someone's stolen the credit card and then all of a sudden I get charges coming through on my credit card that weren't mine, can be really difficult to try and avoid. Also, other types of fraud that can occur offline. One that's big is credit card skimming. And this has been changing quite a bit. It used to be just skimming out of gas pumps. So I live in a pretty rural area, and there are a few gas stations that I'll avoid because I know that people have had their credit cards skimmed from those pumps. So the idea is they put their money in, they put their card in, there's another reader that's malicious in that swipe machine, and it steals the information from the card. The fraudster then takes that and spends a bunch of money. It actually happened to me in Brazil. I was on vacation and using the ATM at the airport, and I got a call from my bank when I got to our Airbnb, and someone had stolen $600 out of my account. So even something as prominent as an ATM, be very judicious on what machines you're putting your credit card in. But now with tap to pay, the permutation that we're seeing, the change, is that people are now using mobile tap devices to gain access to the credit cards. So here, a good thing to avoid, or a good thing to implement, not avoid, is to get a wallet or a credit card holder for your purse that has RFID blocking technology. So it's not broadcasting that signal, because if you're in a crowded area in an elevator, you're walking down a crowded street, who knows, in a parade, sporting event, someone getting close to you could compromise the information on that card through the RFID chip. Having one of those wallets that have the blocking material in them can stop that type of fraud. So really easy, and you can get them on Amazon for $10 or $15. Of course, your social security number, keeping track of it, not providing it, especially proactively. So if someone reaches out to you and they say they're with an organization and they say, I want your social security number, I would not provide it to them in those scenarios. I would only provide the social security number if I was the one that reached out to those organizations, because of how sensitive it is. So generally, they won't ask for your social security number to identify yourself, and there's no harm in calling back to that organization from a number that you know it is. And this happens quite a bit. There was actually a gentleman, I think it was United Airlines, where he was talking to a customer service rep, and they ended up spending thousands of dollars on airline tickets because the call got misdirected. But not providing sensitive information unless you proactively reach out can help avoid some of those issues. And your social security number is a good example of it. So other types of devices to keep secure, Wi-Fi is a big one. Don't join malicious Wi-Fi's. If you see Wi-Fi's out in the public that are free Wi-Fi's, those may be fake. Where it gets a little scarier is USB ports. Some USB ports have fake software, so they're sure they'll charge your device, but they also have software uploaded to steal your information or compromise your phone. Keeping track of your PIN obviously is a good one. And then finally, if you do get your identity stolen or information taken, knowing where to turn. So identitytheft.gov is a good one to know, because it has a step-by-step guide on what to do if your identity is stolen. Even just running out there and reading that, even if you don't have your identity stolen, it can give you insight into how to protect yourself. Annualcreditreport.com, keeping on top of things. One thing I like to do on my accounts, and this is another open question, is should I use a credit card or should I use a debit card? Whether or not you use a credit card or a debit card, I would always say if your account has any significant amount of money in it, having notifications, especially over certain dollar amounts, can help you understand if that account gets compromised. This happened to a guy on my team, and he said that he literally was watching thousands of dollars being sucked out of his account, but was able to act fast enough when it did happen to contact the organization to fix it. And this will be an ongoing debate. Is it better to use a credit card or is it better to use a debit card? Both of them have fraud protection. The debit card may have a shorter period of time where you need to notify. That's why having those pings on when your money is leaving your account can help you understand if someone has compromised your card. Also, some people will say credit cards are better because you're spending the bank's money and not your own money. When that money comes out of the debit account, it's coming out of your bank account and that's your money. Or you can take it a step further and say, if I'm really concerned about the security of my card, I will load up a gift card or have a smaller account for everyday purchases where my losses are mitigated. Maybe I don't put thousands of dollars in that account. Maybe it's $200. And then all that's at risk if that card is compromised is that $200. So certainly something to consider as far as how you're spending money on a daily basis and how to avoid it. But I think here, also understanding the professionals that are involved here. If you are compromised, law enforcement is there to help out. But I think ideally you avoid this before it ever happens. And I will not stop saying that the help of a financial professional, they have your back. They can watch for any of these things happening. And I've seen it time and time again where they've been able to intervene, because constantly we're being bombarded by people who are trying to do us harm and take our money. So with that, I know I talked about a ton of things. We do have a guide, which I believe you can get. But with that, I'll turn it over to Katie for some closing thoughts, or if we got any questions that came in during the presentations.
There you go. Ryan, that was awesome. Thank you so very much. I have not had any questions come over, which I wrote down quite a few notes, so I am amazed we haven't gotten any there. I think a couple of things that you pointed out being really easy kind of next steps worth doing. You'd mentioned the annual credit report, and as I understood, and just want you to reiterate, the easiest next step there would be annualcreditreport.com. Good place
Correct.
to get a hold of that.
Yep. And a lot of banks' credit cards will
Yeah.
offer free credit monitoring services. So with your existing relationships, you may also be able to get a combination of those that's different and separate apart from the credit reporting agencies.
Excellent. One thing I have pointed out to clients and such, and recommend this to anyone, you can also run a credit report on any minor children. A minor child should never have anything on their credit report, and therefore, if anything on there is fraud. So there should never be anything for a minor. I worked on a nonprofit organization where that was one of the things we were doing with former foster children, making sure there was nothing on their report prior to the age of 18. And I loved your point about the pens. That's a really easy one. Just think of which pen you're using. I realize that is not something I have set up in my life, and I'll have to change which one goes in there with the checkbook for that occasional
Thankfully, I
check
don't
I
write a lot
still
of
have to
checks
write.
anymore. But yeah,
Yes, absolutely. Anything else you really think we should know, or any good next steps on your end?
well, I think those action steps round it out. There's almost so much. It can become difficult to try and get your arms around those things to start. But I think what you just mentioned there is a good starting point.
Absolutely.
Good first step.
And for all of our clients on our end here, if you log into Account View and you look at your account, you will notice there is no section there to withdraw money. We've always explained that that has to do with the way we're managing money, right? You pulling it out can mess with portfolios, so give a call to our office. It's also a level of protection. That's the other reason why it's set up that way. And so when we do get that call in, part of the conversation with you is determining, are you really the person who's calling? Is there a level of urgency? If there is, we're going to ask more questions. And there have been times where that has been exactly like you were saying, what we've done. We're going to slow things down, make sure this is real. Thankfully, in most of those cases, turns out it was real. But there have been some times where we've helped protect people because the world out there can be scary sometimes, and we are really happy to be the person to slow things down and help protect you. That is part of what we do. So if you have any questions, if anything comes up or sounds a little weird, please reach out to myself, to Christina, to our team. We are here to help answer questions, help protect you. You know that now these are your life savings. This matters. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. Thank you for those who joined and those who may listen on the replay. Um, Anything you need, please don't hesitate to reach out, myself directly or to our team at connect@sequoiawa.com.